Hey there. Welcome back to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, where we help high-level coaches, consultants, marketers, category designers, and thought leaders get results from every podcast interview. Today's episode is going to challenge the way you think about how professional services are sold. My guest and friend, Greg Alexander, has a refreshingly clear perspective. It's this: products are sold, services are bought. If you've ever struggled with getting your clients to understand your value, or if you've wondered why traditional sales tactics just don't work for your service-based business, this conversation is for you. You see, Greg is the founder of the Collective 54 community and the author of The Boutique: How to Start, Scale, and Sell a Professional Services Firm. While others will talk generically about business, Greg speaks to B2B service-based businesses. Businesses where they are buying your expertise, not just your widget. And today he's going to unpack why the way we buy services is fundamentally different from the way we sell products, and how to understand this will completely transform the way you market and sell your expertise. Stick around, because we're not just talking theory. We're diving into real strategies that you can implement today to build trust, shorten your sales cycle, and ultimately land more of the right clients. Let's get started. Greg, I am so honored to have you here. We already talked a little bit about your background and everything, but what I want to dig in today more than anything is something that you said. It was ordinary to you, amazing to others. And you've said it so many times. It's that products are sold, services are bought. Can you unpack that?
Sure. So a product is sold because the customer is buying a product based on the product's features and benefits relative to their problem. So for example, right now, I am recording this session with you on my Dell laptop. I was sold the product based on Dell's positioning of their product to me. For example, I saw an advertisement and the advertisement said processing speed, storage capacity, battery life. It was sold to me. They were selling features against a problem set that I was qualified to have. Services, on the other hand, the clients oftentimes don't really understand what their problem is. And they need a consultative person to help them understand who their product is. Help them understand if that product is urgent. Should that problem be solved right now? What are the consequences of not solving the problem? What are the possible solutions of solving the problem? It's an intangible. There's a lot more kind of discovery that happens when services are being purchased as opposed to being solved. For example, I can't test drive the service because the economics of a service don't allow for that. If I'm going to buy a pair of jeans, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to put the jeans on and go in the dressing room and look in the mirror. I can check out those jeans. How do I do that with a service? I really can't do that. I mean, there are some ways to allow a prospect to sample the service, but it really can't be experienced until I become a client and start using the service. And it takes time for me to understand how that service is going to benefit for me. So therefore, a service really can't be sold in the traditional sales sense. The service has to be experienced. And because the service has to be experienced, I have to buy it. I have to lean into it as opposed to being convinced by a salesperson that I should buy the individual product. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm going to take that exact same example that you used there. So you bought a laptop computer for yourself, right?
Yep.
If you were in a position where you were in charge of buying the technology for everybody in the company, right? You got 2,000 people. That's really more of a service sale then, right? Because at that point, you want to know what the experience is. You want to know the people you're going to be working with. It's not just a features and benefits. So it's the size. Could it be the size of the investment too?
I think that's part of it for sure. So I would agree with you, but I don't think it's the primary driver upon which the prospect would make a decision. The prospect is going to make a decision on the features of the product, on the price of the product. It's less about the service. The service is part of it, but it's not the lead. When there is no product and what I'm considering to buy is just the service, then the experience is the whole shooting match. That's why services are bought and they're not sold. For example, Tom, you're a member of Collective 54, and we're very grateful for that. I didn't sell you a membership at Collective 54. You tried it out. You experienced and then opted in to become a member. It's a very different sales motion.
That is interesting. And people would say, why are you there? Right? I could go through and, there's weekly calls where I learn a lot. There's the blocks where there's the education there, right? Those are sort of the features and benefits. But what I would probably talk about most is the community and the experience of people learning there. And I'm in different organizations, and I think it's interesting because often we take what works in one industry and extrapolate that to everyone, right? So if they can sell widgets with Facebook ads and funnels, that must work for everyone. And I remember you pointed out one time, if that was the case, why is McKinsey and Ernst & Young, do you see them doing that? It's like, no, it's a different sale.
Yeah. And the consequence of this or the implication of this is enormous. So for example, when you're selling a product and you run a classic business to business sales campaign, it could take you anywhere from 3 months to 12 months to close that deal. And by the way, you're not getting paid for that. That's a sales cost that the product company eats in pursuit of that business. In contrast, when you're selling a service, you're engaged in a new business pursuit. One of the first things that a service company would do is position to the prospect the need to do some type of diagnostic or some type of discovery. And the prospect agrees and pays for that. So I don't have to go 12 months and cross my fingers and hope that I'm going to get the deal. The client understands the way that services are procured, and they engage with the service company to go through the discovery process. And because there's tangible value at the end of that, there's some type of gap analysis, some type of readout, they pay for it. So the time to revenue when you're in the services business is a fraction of the time to revenue than when you're in a product business. That's another example of the implications of services being bought, not being sold, whereas products are being sold. Now, why can product companies do this? Well, if you're Salesforce.com, your gross margins are 90%. Their marginal cost of selling one more seat is basically zero. Their business model is you write the software once and you sell it 1 billion times. It's not that way in services. If I'm going to deploy a team to go do a discovery for that particular client, there's a real cost associated with that. And I have to generate some revenue to offset that cost. It's entirely different business model altogether. And in sales in particular is where it differs the most.
That's interesting. So the cost of lead acquisition that you can tolerate and the sales cycle, right? Time to get paid varies drastically between a product and a service too.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're in the services business, you're getting paid to, pursue business with a new client. And the client knows that and they understand that and they're willing to pay it. It's not that way in the product game.
So you've said before that, with a service, you can't try the service, right?
You can try a piece of it, like you can sample it, but not really.
And as I hear that, there's a couple things. One, you said, well, if you have a smaller product at the very beginning, diagnostic, something like that, that's sort of a way to trial the experience. Would you say the sales process is also, the sale is the sample?
Yeah, big time. And the reason for that, Tom, is because usually, although not always, but usually in services, the person that is engaging with the prospect on a potential project, if the prospect hires that service company, the person who sold the work is probably involved in the delivery of the work. You can't necessarily separate salesperson or business development person from the actual delivery of the service. In a product company, it's entirely different. I mean, when I buy my iPhone, am I staying engaged with the engineer who designed the iPhone? No, I've never met him. So it's completely divorced.
Yeah, that's interesting, even especially in boutique agencies. But as you said that, I'm thinking friends I know that are in legal services, right? It's the same thing, right? They're still involved. It's not one department does sales, the other one does delivery.
Yeah. In fact, when I had my consulting firm, SBI, we had built in to our sales process a milestone. And the milestone was we would bring the quote delivery team to meet with the client during the campaign. And we would say to the client, if you do hire us, let me introduce you to Mary, Sue, and Elizabeth. Mary, Sue, and Elizabeth are going to be delivering this service for you. And this is Mary's responsibility. This is Sue's responsibility. This is Elizabeth's responsibility. And then we would socialize with them a bit, usually over a meal, to try to feel like, will there be chemistry amongst the group, et cetera, et cetera. And you would never do anything like that when you're selling a product, because in the eyes of a client or a customer in that case, they don't really care. They're buying the feature function of the product. They're not buying the team. When you're in the services game, the team is a huge component of the decision criteria, and knowing who they are and meeting them and evaluating them, looking at their bios, looking at the track record, talking to their references. That's all part of it.
That's interesting because we'll even bring on our client account managers now onto roadmap calls so they can see who they're working with. The other thing that we're seeing too is, I'm the face of the company, same way you're the face of the company. But I am not the great face for certain verticals, right? I am not Mr. Health, Nutrition, and Wellness, but we do have people that speak to that and can speak to it better. And so from that standpoint, they get to see the expertise there in the company, not just who the founder is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when I was in that situation, the client would say to me, well, hey, Greg, I'm not going to say yes to this project unless I know you're going to be delivering the work. And then I would say to the client, if I deliver the work, you're going to be very unsatisfied. You're going to be an unhappy client. And here are the reasons why. Here are the 15 tasks that need to get done. And I'm not an expert in those 15 things. Let me introduce you to Elizabeth and have her demonstrate to you her chops on those 15 tasks. And then they would meet Elizabeth in this hypothetical, and they would say, yeah, you're right, Greg, you can leave now. You're right. We don't need you anymore.
My line is always my microphone makes me sound good. My team makes me look good.
I love that. That's great.
So there's this thing of, do you need attention or do you need trust? Or do you need both? How do you think about those from a professional services industry?
That's a great question. So services are what's known as a leap of faith purchase. And this goes back to something we talked about earlier, in that you really can't try out the service until you become a client. So therefore, when making the purchase decision, to a degree, you're making a leap of faith. As a result of making the leap of faith, the service provider needs to build trust. They need to reduce the fear in the mind of the prospect that it's okay to make this leap of faith because I'm not going to let you down. I am going to deliver. I've protected you, etc. And there's all kinds of ways to do that, from contracting to testimonials to et cetera, et cetera. But trust, therefore, when you're selling a service is super important, more important than attention, because of the nature of the purchase, the leap of faith purchase. I would also suggest that when selling a service, now this varies to a degree depending on the type of service. If you're a service provider out there seeking the attention of people, you're signaling to the market that you're not that successful, that you really need the work, and therefore you're seeking their attention. You talked about McKinsey earlier. To the best of my knowledge, they've never spent a dime in 100 years on advertising because they don't need the work. They're choosing the work. People are going to them They're not going to people. And now that's hard to do when you're a small boutique, as we like to call them, because small boutiques need the work. They don't have the brand name of McKinsey and people aren't lining up around the block to hire them. But you got to be really careful how you do that. As a business owner myself, I'm constantly being marketed to by service providers seeking my attention. And I just hit the delete button all the time because they're signaling the wrong things to me. They're signaling desperation.
That's interesting. We had a client that came to us, and I remember asking him, why do you want to do podcast interviews? And Greg, I loved his answer. He said, because I think most of digital marketing is like advertising above a urinal. And I said, what does that mean? And he's like, well, that's where my clients are, but that's not where they want to be marketed to, right? So he said, if I'm seen, on a bus, on a billboard, above a urinal, it's not going to help my brand. It's not going to help that trust. And as you were saying that, so in sales, we're always talking about deleting the friction, right? Get the friction out of the process here, right? Is that friction in professional services, is the biggest friction trust then?
Yeah, because of the nature of the leap of faith that's required, for sure. So that is the friction. It's usually not the traditional friction, like, is this going to work? Am I getting a good deal? Is this the right solution for me relative to the alternatives? Those are the types of things you see more in product than you do in services. The friction is that leap of faith scenario that's required. You're required to trust somebody, and you're signing a contract and paying for the service before you experience the service. You brought up podcasting, and we're on a podcast, so this is helpful. But the reason why podcasting is such a great marketing tool for services companies is because it approximates the service itself. For example, somebody that's listening to this, the minute they put those white AirPods in their ears and they're listening, I'm coming to life. That's a multi-dimensional experience as opposed to reading text off of a page or reading copy off of an advertisement or looking at a graphic on a screen. It comes to life more. And that's why I think podcasting is such a great vehicle for service companies.
So let's talk about it, because you've got your own podcast, the ProServe podcast, sponsored by Collective 54, but you're also a guest. How do you see those two working out?
So the podcast for Collective 54 members is just that. It's for existing members, and mostly, not entirely, but mostly. And every week, the person on the podcast is a member. We call them a role model. And there's somebody who's implemented a portion of the boutique framework in some capacity. And those interviews they take one of two flavors. One is a success story. So I implemented this portion of the boutique framework. And for those that aren't familiar with that, we have a framework on how to grow, scale, and exit a boutique professional services firm, which I wrote about in my book of the same name, The Boutique: How to Start, Scale, and Sell a Professional Services Firm. And it's a methodology, if you will, a framework. So the weekly role model will say, hey, I implemented this, and here's what it did for me. That's a success story. Or they'll say, I implemented this and it didn't work for me. That's a cautionary tale, equally valuable, because it helps the rest of us avoid any dumb taxes that person had just paid. And that podcast is designed mostly, I'd say 85% for existing members. And most of our listeningship, if you will, is existing members. It is published because there is some attractiveness to non-members, and that is a member acquisition tool for us for sure. Now, in contrast, when I'm a guest, and Tom, you were kind enough to book me on some podcast, on somebody else's show, that audience probably doesn't have many Collective 54 members in it. And my participation there has a different objective, and that is awareness of Collective 54 and of me and of my book. And that's a member acquisition tool, very different objective altogether.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the same platform, right? Should you be a Uber guest or an Uber driver or an Uber passenger?
Right.
Depends on your goals. Well,
Right.
Being a host is a great way to nurture their current leads, current clients, being a guest is the way to go out there and get the new ones. And one of the things that I learned so much from our clients, it was Steve Acho years ago that told me, more is not better, better is better. And one of the things that you and your team have totally impressed me with is how you can wring every drop of value out of a piece of content, right? You do great interviews, but you do more with the interviews, not just doing more interviews. Can you talk a little bit about how you look at this foundational content and how you use that in your overall marketing and even delivery?
Yeah. So our editorial calendar, which everything starts off of that, starts with the problems that our members are dealing with. And we learn about those problems based on the questions that they ask us. And then when we start hearing the same question being asked by multiple members over an extended time period, we realize that that's a problem that a lot of people are having. And our members, there's a few hundred of them at this point, go across the entire industry code 54. That's the North American industry classification code for professional services. So think consulting companies and marketing agencies and IT service providers, people in the expertise business. And what they all have in common, I mean, what does a law firm have in common with a marketing agency? It's the exact same business model. You are marketing, selling, and delivering expertise for a living on some package and some version of the billable hour. The domain is different, law versus marketing, et cetera, but the business model is the same. Therefore, the obstacles to scaling are identical. So when we hear that, it might be acquiring new clients, launching new services, employee engagement, executive compensation, whatever it is, it applies across all those things. So we start with the editorial calendar. Once we have the editorial calendar, of which we have that out 12 months, we start saying to ourselves, okay, what are the different forms of media that we want to talk that about? So there's books and there's podcasts and there's videos and there's blogs and there's member written blogs. There's LinkedIn posts, there's newsletters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the way we came to that is we realized that this diverse membership consumes media in a different way. And if you want to watch it, then we should allow you to watch it. If you want to listen to it, you can listen to it. If you want to read it, you can read it. And if we only had one form of media, we would be underserving our members. So we try to create multiple forms of media. Then, this is where it really gets interesting, is there's meta content. So what do I mean by meta content? Well, much like when you go to university, you might take a 101 class freshman year, a 201 class sophomore year, 301 class junior year, 401 class senior year. Well, same thing with the problems. You might have the basic version of the problem, and therefore a basic solution makes sense. But then once you solve that, you realize that every time you climb the hill and you think you're at the summit, and you look over and there's a taller hill in front of you, right? And you got to keep going. So that's kind of meta content. So we piece all that together into individualized learning paths. We call them building blocks, and they're by category. So there might be service delivery or financial management or labor relations or sales and marketing, et cetera. And we package them all up. One of the things we learned, and we were taught this by members, I had a member tell me, speaking about learning from your members, said to me, say, Greg, I'm a new member, and I feel like I just got dropped into Yellowstone, the TV show, episode 13, season 3. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, what happened before that, right? So we had to piece all this together so people could start at the beginning and then, binge their way, for, to use an analogy, up to the current state and then progress. So that's how we organize it.
It's amazing to see how they've repurposed that, right? And the other thing is that I love how you create in the way that's easiest for you, and then you repurpose in other ways, right? So you can just talk and genius comes out, but some people don't want to listen to all of that. So you can tell, okay, here's the good quotes that they pulled out so people can read those. And so it's interesting. Sometimes you should go through the blocks and you can see when different things were made. And I'm going to out myself on this. My team has said if I ever shave my beard, they're quitting, right? Because I grew the beard about 5 years ago, and all of a sudden, everything before that looked dated. Now, as you get healthier and healthier, it's just like, it almost looks like this is the new stuff, that's the old stuff there. But it's amazing that stuff that you taught 4 years ago is still applicable. And you'll see a video coming up, and it's like, how did I miss that one? Right?
It's funny. I have a similar situation. So we launched in January of 2020. And of course, in March 2020, COVID hit and we all got locked into our caves. And during that 18-month time period, I gained 50 pounds. I was sitting on my couch ordering DoorDash too frequently. So some of those videos, my face is like 3 times the size it is right now. And I go back and I look at those videos and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that I was that heavy.
We got to get the AI to pretty us up here. Greg, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. If you're talking to somebody that's a professional services owner, right? Well, first of all, they should read the book, The Boutique. I'm going to say that. You don't have to. The better book is called The Founder's Bottleneck. And this year I put up 25 books that changed my life. And that was one of them. And people were like, I can't find it. Where is it? Right? There's no Amazon link. I'm like, no, Greg only gives that to members of Collective 54. So check out Collective 54. It's a great community. But what would you say to them about growing their business, right? Growing it, scaling it, exiting in the concept of products are sold, services are bought?
Yeah. So what I would say is, regarding Collective 54, and what I would say to people who are young, smaller services firms that want to grow, that want to scale, and that want to exit, the most effective way to do that is to learn from your peers. And building a network, a community of peers, and I mean real peers. I don't mean like superficial demographic profiles. I mean people that are in the same industry, people that are in the same segment within that industry, people that have the same job title, owner, founder, as an example, real peers. If you can get into a community like that, and there's several of them, Collective 54 is one, others are YPO and Vistage and EO. I'm a YPO member. I love it. I used to be an EO member. I loved it. These communities are wonderful, wonderful things. But peer learning is the best because it's very, very practical. So in the spirit of services being bought, not sold, I would encourage all of you to try out our community and some of these other communities and get a feel for yourself. And the way you do that is you meet your peers. And you say this, and this is another difference between products and services. And maybe this is a good thing for me to put an exclamation point on. When you're a product company, you have a customer. And it's a one-way transaction. And it's transactional. You pay me money, I give you a product. When you're a member of a community, it's a two-way relationship and it's not transactional. It's implied in being a member that you have to contribute to the membership. And Tom, you've done a great job in our community of contributing and teaching people about the power of podcasting and being a guest on someone's podcast, etc. And then when you contribute to the community, you also are then able to extract from the community. That's why it's called a collective. And we collectively go farther than we would on our own. So the way to experience that and decide if that's best for you is just to try it out and meet your peers and say to yourself, ask yourself 2 questions when you meet one of your peers in one of these communities. What can I contribute to this community? That's the first question. And then the second question is, what can this community contribute to me? And if it's a 50-50 deal, you should join. If it's not a 50-50 deal, you shouldn't join.
So well said. And I'm a member of EO. I'm too old to be in YPO. You got that on me. And I would say they're different from the standpoint of peer groups, right? There's one thing to be an entrepreneur, and I get a lot from that, right? But professional services are different, right? To talk about your problems with someone that is also in professional services is different than somebody that runs, rental houses or somebody that runs a grocery store, right? Great businesses. It's not the business I'm in. So Greg, thank you for all you do, the community you've put together, and the value you've shared here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tom, and thanks for being a great member. It's my pleasure.
What an insightful conversation with Greg Alexander. If you've been treating your service-based business like a product company, maybe it's time to shift your mindset. You see, services aren't sold, they're bought. And that means your marketing, your sales, your client acquisition strategies need to focus on trust, relationships, and experience. The sale is the sample. Greg shared some absolute gold today, and I encourage you to reflect on how you're engaging with potential clients. Are you making it easy for them to experience a piece of your service? Are you building trust before asking for the sale? And speaking of trust, if you found value in today's conversation, don't let it end here. Take action. Connect with Greg over at the Collective 54 community. Check out his book, The Boutique. And most importantly, apply what you've learned today to your own business. And if you're serious about using podcast interviews to build authority and grow your brand, let's connect. Head over to Interview Valet to learn how we help experts like you get in front of the right audiences. Until next time, get out there, share your expertise, and turn their listeners into your leads.